HTLA Radio 1.
From all of us at HTLA Radio 1 New York, happy holidays!
Favorite show theme ever. Someday I really wish we're going to have to play that for you in its entirety. That is the kickinest theme, and Chris wrote it, and I love it. So welcome to Real Talk. I am your host, this intellectual Kate Taylor, and this is HTLA Radio 1 New York. If you love film, if you live film, then this is the film show for you. Tonight we're going to dive deep into the abyss and shark tear some submerged cinema. So keep in mind that with the exception of special episodes, the films I analyze are not currently in theaters. I go beyond spoilers in this show and I break down the structure and story of the films I compare. So if you've not yet seen the films I'm discussing tonight, remember that they're all available on Netflix unless otherwise noted. So go watch them, get into them, then come back and tear them up with me here. This is a film analysis show, not a film review show. This show is for those with an interest in not just seeing film, but being part of the history of making them. I am a storyteller. I am a screenwriter, married to a director, and we tell stories. Thus, I dissect and analyze the stories others tell, so I can constantly discover and learn and find better ways to tell my stories to you. If you more than watch film, if you, like me, become the film you're watching for that 90 or so minutes, then again, welcome to Real Talk. So before we get into tonight's show, I've got to take care of those generous and brilliant folks that keep me on the air for you. Tonight's episode of Real Talk is brought to you by Netflix. It just might bring everyone together. Universal Pictures and Studio Canal, producers of the February 2014 thriller Nonstop, starring Liam Neeson and Julianne Moore. Go like the film's page on Facebook at Facebook.com/Nonstop. Yeah, I can't wait to see and review that one. That's going to be a good one. And Orville Redenbacher's Gourmet Naturals. Gourmet flavor, none of the guilt. Please keep in mind that the opinions I'm about to express here in my show do not necessarily reflect those of HTLA Radio 1 or our sponsors and advertisers. So lastly, for all of my past, current, and future episode information, as well as forums in which to discuss what you think about my celluloid dissection, register a free profile on www.htla973.com and do some real talking of your own. Once again, if you've missed it, Meeps, this show contains uber spoilers of the films I discuss. If you'd like to see the films untainted by my analysis, do so. Then come and listen to this episode on the website after. Okay, now on with the show. Tonight's films both take place underwater, and they're both about submarines. So my first film is the recently added to Netflix 2013 release Phantom, starring the unmatched Ed Harris and David Duchovny. Also, and I've got to throw this in here, starring in a wonderful supportive turn, our dear friend, Jonathan Check. This film boasts a really good supporting cast. In fact, the ever wonderful William Fichtner. Oh, you'll know him when you see him, because he's been in everything. Actually, my favorite role was him. He was Sully in Perfect Storm with George Clooney. So that's one of my favorite roles of his. Jason Bieg of Monkey Shine's fame, his very old film. He was the star in that film where he was paralyzed and he got a little capuchin monkey to help him with his chores, and the monkey goes nuts. And that was a really good film, too, if you're into that sort of thing. And not the least, the ever-present and bringing it Lance Henriksen. As Ed Harris's wife, Dagmara Dominitz, who you might remember as the gorgeous object of Jim Caviezel's affection in The Count of Monte Cristo, which is another outrageously great film. And rounded out further by Sean Patrick Flannery. So it's got quite a cast. You know, it's no slouch in the cast department. The film is written, produced, and directed by Todd Robinson. This is an RCR Media Group presents a Trilogy Entertainment Group production in association with Solar Filmworks. Jeez, that is a mouthful, isn't it? And it was released in March of 2013 here in the States. Now, I've chosen, for some obvious and some not so obvious reasons, The Hunt for Red October to analyze this film with. Now, some might say that's really, really unfair, given the clout of the cast, the crew, the writing chops of the makers of this blockbuster Hollywood film, and even the age of the production compared to the just-released Phantom. But the reason I've chosen to do so is exactly the difference in the production age, because I want to illustrate a point about good filmmaking versus gotta filmmaking. And I'll explain that more in a bit. So this film, ironically, was also released in March, but in 1990. And it takes place in 1984. It's written by Tom Clancy, and the late Tom Clancy now, yeah. And adapted for the screen by Larry Ferguson and Donald Stewart. This film has an unimaginable cast, all noted as legends. Even the bit parts have seen the actors playing them go on to bigger, better, and even more awesome careers. So, starring Sean Connery as Captain Ramus and Alec Baldwin as Jack Ryan, the rest of the cast list reads as a who's who of Hollywood, including Scott Glenn, Sam Neill, James Earl Jones, Joss Ackland, Richard Jordan, Peter Firth, the late Richard Jordan, he passed away too, Peter Firth, Tim Curry, Courtney B. Vance, Stellan Skarsgård, and Jeffrey Jones of Ferris Bueller fame. Unfortunately, also the late Jeffrey Jones, because he's passed too. Wow, so many of these actors are no longer with us. It's just unimaginable. Anyway, Hunt is produced by Larry DeWay and Jerry Sherlock. So, generally what I do in the initial stages of the films is I talk a little bit about budget. Because to me, it's important. You know, if the film's really great and it's got a small budget, well, you know, that says a lot about, you know, the makers of it, you know, and if it's got this outrageous budget and that it's a really kind of sucky film, well, that says a lot about it too. So for Phantom, it had an estimated budget of $18 million. And in the crucial time frame that is calculated for this sort of thing, it only grossed $2,178,000. So yeah, really not such a great turnout. Now Hunt had an estimated budget of $30 million. And it made over $200 million worldwide, including $18 million on its opening weekend 23 years ago. Now, this is before the internet's mass promotional ability, you know, and all that stuff we do now to jack up the hype about an upcoming film. So in Hunt for Red October's opening weekend, it made as much as the budget for Phantom was. Now, if Phantom was really good and kick butt and amazing, and that's why I picked it, then, you know, that would be a pretty impressive thing, you know. But, you know, we'll get into a little bit why as we go. But unfortunately, I mean, everybody's got, of course, their own opinions. But, you know, from a filmmaking perspective and an importance perspective, because that's how I do things and analyze things. Yeah, this is more of a kind of best of the best and worst of the worst show. Unfortunately, when it comes to this particular genre of, like, you know, submarine, espionage, political thriller kind of thing. So, and, well, you'll find out why in a little while. Okay, so after I talk about budget, I usually talk about, you know, cinematography, choices, comparisons, that sort of thing, because obviously it's a visual medium, so those things are really important. Now, Phantom is meant to take place in 1968. Thus, it's my feeling that Todd Robinson chose to use the Red Epic camera and ultimately transfer to film to try and capture that of-the-time feel somehow. Sadly, to me, it left me feeling like something critical was missing for my eye. I mean, especially since a great many of the shots are close quarters on the sub, and they really needed to be more creative rather than so claustrophobic. To me, that aspect totally overshadowed the importance of the actual scene taking place. So I really didn't care much about what was going on. I was too distracted by feeling uncomfortable and pretty much just wishing it were shot better. Now, the DOP here is Byron Werner. And so far, I guess it should be said in his defense, I guess, is that that's where we're going, is that his biggest project before Phantom was the horror flick Scare or Die. So enough said, and as filmmaking is a collaborative effort, you're only as good as your crew and their bits. The film is the sum of its parts. And, unfortunately, I feel like with the choices that were made, maybe having a more experienced in this kind of genre kind of thing, DOP would have actually done more to make this a better film overall. Now, Jan de Bont is the DOP of Hunt for Red October. And I probably should just stop right there, because if anybody is into film and knows who that is and all the work he's done to this point, then that's pretty much all I need to say. But if you don't, his credits include the best of the best, such as Basic Instinct, Black Rain, Lethal Weapon, Shining Through, which is a really great film, and I'd love, love, love to do it here. And maybe I will. It's a World War II epic starring Michael Douglas and Melanie Griffith, and it was just brilliant. I mean, it had everything to it. It was a romance. It was a thriller. It was and Liam Neeson, amazing in it, too. It was just fantastic. So go see Shining Through if you haven't seen it yet. He also was the DOP for Die Hard, and all the way back to Clan of the Cave Bear, and even Cujo, for God's sakes. Yeah. So again, enough said. But what I will say about the feel of Hunt for Red October, as opposed to what I discussed previously regarding Phantom, is that Jan de Bont used film to make incredible choices and creative decisions. And he did this in such a way that I felt that I was in the interiors of the scenes and not just watching them. Where Byron Werner's choices, and don't forget, he used the most expensive digital camera we've got right now, next to the IMAX, of course, to try and make his project, which is utterly laden with visual eccentricities and surreal montages, by the way, look like dated film. So, it's like, that just totally confused me. And to me, it was just a bad choice. And it was a bad choice that, unfortunately, no pun intended, totally sank this film. It just torpedoed this film, right? Okay, so after this part, I usually spend some time dissecting the director's motivations in this segment. But now, as for McTiernan, he'd just come off the successes of Die Hard 1 and 2 and Predator. So when he was approached to direct this adaptation, it made sense. He was kind of the hot thing at the time, and I think it was a great choice. I mean, when you're talking about Die Hards and Predators and how they're visual, he's like the Michael Bay of now. Back then that was what he was doing. That was what he was known for. So it was kind of a little bit of a really showing his chops by doing this film, because it was much more character based and it was a lot less showy, and it was more, oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? What is the word I'm looking for? Don't you hate that? It was just a lot more visually, he needed to make a lot more visually artistic decisions in this than in, Blow 'em Up Die Hard and Blow 'em Up Predator. So the fact that it was so immensely successful, just speaks to his success, right? And I've got an interesting tidbit, if you didn't know, about Joe McTiernan. There was a big scandal of some years back where he actually told the FBI to investigate an investigator in Hollywood, and I'm sure you've heard about this. And he falsely told the FBI that this other guy had done some bad stuff in the making of the film. And the FBI actually found this out. And right now he's in the middle of an appeals process because he got sentenced to a year in jail and a $100,000 fine for perjury and all this stuff for lying to the FBI. So if you haven't heard anything come out of Joe McTiernan's offices lately, this is why, because, he got in big trouble. Anyway, that's just a little aside because I like to do that. Okay, so for me, Hunt for Red October is all around successful because of the immense talent that was cobbled together for the project, the timing of when it was made, and the fact that he did really show his filmmaking chops by coming off those blockbuster action kind of films and making a more intellectual thriller. So I've got to say that. And I really do feel as though anyone missing or replaced, And the cast or crew of this film could have upset the delicate balance that is the perfect pacing and practical, realistic enjoyment of this film. And I know my husband will appreciate that, because that's a bonus, as we, for once, don't have to suspend disbelief to connect with a film. Whether the appeal for you is the intrigue, the character arc of whomever was your favorite, the action, or the bang-on dialogue and scene connection, Hunt for Red October is a model for political thrillers at its most basic level. And it wouldn't surprise me if it's used as that, in film schools and such for that particular genre, because to me it's just perfect. Now, I've got to say, it's time for a commercial break in a few minutes, but I just want to get through this one segment. Sadly, as for Todd Robinson, I have to feel that the ultimate failure of Phantom comes from mostly directing for the small screen. His one feature credit is a film called Lonely Hearts, made in 2006, starring yet another A-list cast. I don't know how he does it. John Travolta, the late James Gandolfini, Salma Hayek, and Jared Leto. Now, I'm putting it on my list to see, though, because it's about a true crime, and I'm all into that. We might discuss true crime films in an upcoming special. So I'd like to see it and see how he handled that. But Phantom, to me, was too ambitious and too unfocused, and it's an attempt to genre mix. Now, about 5 years ago, that was absolutely the way to go. Mix genres that hadn't been done before, and boom, you've got a studio-backed film. But, the trick to that was doing it right. And what he did here was try to mix a Russian espionage film, whether it was based on true events or not. The fact that it was just, to me, made it worse. Throw in scenes out of Jacob's Ladder. Have your starring actor reprise a role that he's already mastered in a better underwater film. Essentially, Ed Harris played the same role that he did in The Abyss. Essentially. And then think you can redeem the whole American accent-speaking mess with the one decent character arc in the film. Now, sadly, I've got to say that too many bad decisions were made in the making of this film. Bad choices for crew selection and unchallenged choices, in my opinion. I think that everybody was afraid to kind of say, well, that might not work so well, and why don't you try this? Because the writer was also the director and the executive producer. Those are the rare instances when that trifecta doesn't work. You're not Mel Gibson. You're not Clint Eastwood. At least not yet. Not one feature under your belt. And A-list actors or not, it's clear that everybody was just glad to get paid and go home. So we will get into a little bit more about why that is. I have to take my first commercial break now, but please stay with me 2 minutes. We're going to talk a bit more about plot points when we get back.
From all of us at HTLA Radio 1 New York, happy holidays!
I hate flying. The lines, the crowds, the delays.
I always kind of liked it. 6 hours, one seat, nobody can get to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard our non-stop service from New York to London.
You fly much?
All the time, actually. Someone on this flight is threatening to kill someone every 20 minutes unless $150 million is transferred to this account number.
We're midway across the Atlantic. How do you kill someone in a crowded plane and get away with it?
Ladies and gentlemen, I need every passenger to raise their hands above their head.
This is a bad idea.
Marshal, we have a right to know what the hell is going.
Agent Marks, the account number you gave us is in your name.
What? That doesn't make any sense. This is a setup. Something else is going on.
The FBI, the White House, and Interpol are confirming reports that an international flight has been hijacked by an air marshal.
Agent Marks, our fighter escort has you in their sights. Do you hear me?
We're running out of time. Do you hear me? I'm not hijacking this plane. I'm trying to save it.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. And since we've no place to go, make it so, make it so, make it so. Man, it doesn't show signs of stopping. And I brought me some tea Earl Grey hot. The lights are turned way down low. Make it so, make it so, make it so. When we finally kiss goodnight. How I hate going out in the storm. But if you...
Really?
Shut up, Wesley! All the way home, I'll be...
Warm. Oh, the fire is slowly dying. And my dear...
We're still goodbye, then. But
as long as you love me so, make it so. Make it so. Make it so.
From all of us at HTLA Radio 1 New York, happy holidays.
We are HTLA Radio 1. You will lower your shields and prepare to be boarded. We will add your distinctiveness, your advertisers, and your sponsors to our own. Resistance is futile.
Okay, we're back and you're listening to Real Talk with Kate Taylor on HTLA Radio 1 New York. So I just have to quickly say I love that Star Trek, that compilation of the Happy Holidays. That's an homage because I don't know if many people know, but my husband actually used to work on those shows in Vancouver. So, it's kind of near and dear to his heart, and we're sci-fi fans around here. Okay, yeah, I'll have to do some more sci-fi shows, duh, right? But so anyway, tonight we're talking about Submerged Cinema. My comparisons are between the just released on Netflix, March 2013 released Phantom. And, the fact that it was released in March and it's already on Netflix, it pretty much speaks for itself as well, and I'm doing a very incredibly unfair comparison to Hunt for Red October, but now that I'm actually getting into the meat of the films here in this second segment, you'll understand why I'm doing that, hopefully. Okay, and it's the difference between good filmmaking and gotta filmmaking. Now let me explain that a little bit too. Good filmmaking obviously is timeless, and it's those kind of films that we always fall back on when we think of great and good films, and Godfather and Braveheart, and some people will say Star Wars, and some people will say The Lord of the Rings, and all those things that what we consider kind of epic, amazing blockbuster kind of films. And then there's the gotta filmmakers, and they're the ones that make film because they can, not because they should. And there's too many of those nowadays for our taste, and not enough of the good filmmakers, and way too many gotta filmmakers. So that's where that, I've coined that phrase, the good filmmaking versus the gotta filmmaking. So Phantom to me is a gotta film, and Hunt for Red October clearly is a good film. So, yeah. Now we're going to talk a little bit about plot points and devices, and I got to say, for Phantom, there's not going to be that many, unfortunately. This is something that it was a really good idea. I'm not saying Todd Robinson didn't have a great idea. It was based on true events, which is the second of his based on true events kind of thing. I see a trend here. But it could have been done really, really, really well, But Phantom centers around a technology of the same name that'll allow the sonar signal of a sub using the device to replicate its ping and lead enemy vessels astray by disguising it as any other vessel type nearby. So, for instance, in one scene, there was a freighter passing by, and they replicated that ping and tricked the American sub into thinking it was the freighter instead of them. So, Hunt for Red October relies on the Caterpillar device that cloaks the sub's position by running completely silently and undetectably. A little more believable, right? And, perfectly understandable. So both films keep you guessing as to the motivations of the main characters. But where Hunt, however, expertly makes you care whether Sean Connery is defecting or, God forbid, a bad guy doing something bad, because we can't fathom that. Even by the first 20 minutes of the film, we can't imagine, The surreal attempts at trying to make the audience confused as to the motivations of all the main characters in Phantom truly, and for me, make me not care about any of them. You know, Hunt used tried and true film school plot devices, pacing, tightly perfected performances, amazing filmmaking. You know, Phantom, however, is just a mess of plot and unnecessary devices that simply don't work. You know, they shot the entire thing underwater on the sub except the opening and ending scenes. You know, the is he crazy or is there a ghost on board device? You know, and the worst probably is trying to evoke a period piece from one of the most uninteresting periods of filmmaking, the late 60s. Okay, so it took place in the 60s. You know, you don't need to make it look like it was made in the 60s. Oi, you know, you just don't. So, unfortunately, there's not as many plot devices as I'd like to be able to discuss. It was fairly simple. It tried to stick to the Hollywood formula because it wanted to be on, you know, big screens and in major theaters and stuff like that. But yet, it also had, like, the heart of an indie and, unfortunately, the aptitude of an indie. You know, not even a good indie. So it's like I said, I think that it was just an ambitious kind of thing on Todd Robinson's part. So that's it. Now, as far as character differences go, both Sean Connery and Ed Harris deliver stellar performances. You know, I've got to say, each made these films what they are in the best possible way. Poor Ed, though. You know, he did the very best he could with the script he was given, and the supporting cast for Phantom could do little else but the best they could do and hold Harris up as the point of the film. So, unlike Hunt for Red October, where there's more than one character we care about, right? Phantom had only Harris that we wanted explained, and we kind of just wanted it explained and we wanted it done so we can go home. You know, and that's kind of the scary and unfortunate part. You know, subplots. Are they better for the film or worse? Now, where Hunt has subplot that precedes and follows the making of this film via other Tom Clancy / Jack Ryan vehicles, Phantom had only subplots that attempted to further explain the convoluted script. It was almost as if the director couldn't just come out and narrate, so he created subplots. And that, actually, the whole narration thing might have been a better plot device because it just didn't work. It made it a big mess. We're stuck underwater in this big boat. Everybody's losing their stuff, and we don't know what's going on. And if I don't know what's going on, and I watch Japanese horror, and if I don't know what's going on, then nobody else is going to know what's going on. So it was just a convoluted mess, you know. Now, usually you can be redeemed in the climax, you know, or in the way that the film paces to lead to the climax. Hunt, I don't even need to talk about it. You know, I mean, obviously it was tightly paced. It was well done. It you know, it had all the points, you know, in the acts, and it had all of those, you know, the plot turns and all the things that were necessary to lead the film to its logical conclusion. But Phantom, none. It was pretty much a steady, monotonous, you know, what's going to happen next? Oh my God, here's another epileptic fit, and oh, now somebody else is threatening something, and oh, there goes another epileptic fit, and then we finally get explained why he's having fits, and that's kind of the whole reason he is what he is, you know, and why he's even on the boat in the first place. Actually, they never did explain, really, what happens to Lance Henriksen, and I don't really want to give it away because it is just new on Netflix, but if anybody else can tell me, then let me know afterwards. But it's really not even fair, like I said in my opening, to compare these two films. Hunt for Red October is a beautiful example of timeless filmmaking, where Phantom is only not an indie because it had a budget higher than that classification permits, and that is the only reason. You know, Hunt won an Academy Award for Best Effects and Best Effects Sound Effects Editing. And it was also nominated for Best Sound and Best Editing. It did win a BAFTA for Best Sound, as well as Best Production Design and Best Actor for Sir Connery. So this is an award-winning film, you know. And I do so hate to say, but the only award that Phantom will win is a Razzie. And that's it. You know, and the only reason I've chosen to even do this comparison here is to pretty much diatribe on the ever-dropping bar of excellence. You know, it goes back to that good filmmaking versus the god of filmmaking. So where it was once only slightly lowered as the internet made everyone think they can write and direct film by reading articles on the internet and watching YouTube how-to videos, it's now begun to completely disappear with anyone that can raise the money to put a film on screens. You know, like I said, that trifecta, writer, director, producer. You know, he financed it, you know, from the projects he did before. Just because he can doesn't mean he should. You know, and that's the way it goes. And like I said, in his defense, Todd Robinson directed a bunch of network television and had only one other feature to his credit with, again, A-list stars in it. So I just don't know how he managed that with the scripts being what they are. You know, because one of the stars of the film is a personal friend of ours, and I seriously even hesitated to do this show. But I had to be fair to my listeners and fans. You know, I debated it. Everybody here said, yes, you have to do it. You know, and I kind of was the one, well, you know, I don't want to, you know. But it's not, his performance was great. The actors' performances were great. The vehicle, not so much. You know, all the actors' performances were beyond admirable. But that's really all I can say about this storyless vehicle that is Phantom. So Hunt for Red October has a tight plot and made sense, like I said, from beginning to end. We saw the intrigue unfold as the film kept us well-paced and interested in its many layers. You know, Phantom was completely flat. It was just, here's what it is. What's going to happen? Oh, this is what happened. Okay, see you later. And that's pretty much what it was. You know, it had a climax that, to me, was a complete cop-out. You know, it was a complete cop-out to hash the story to that point. Well, I'll tell you a little bit. You know, it ended with we'll sacrifice our lives so the world can know what almost happened here, and I'll be redeemed in the process. Yay. You know, and the end was completely sappy and contrived because of that. You know, to me, the daughter would have no way been proud for that one thing the father did to redeem himself for the terrible thing he did that prompted the whole entire movie in the first place. So the bottom line is, if you're going to submerge yourself in submarine thrillers, see Hunt for Red October. See K-19, The Widowmaker. See Das Boot. See U-571. Don't see Phantom. Or if you're going to, don't put it in the same class as submarine thrillers or political espionage thrillers, because it was more of I would classify it more as one of my horror films. You know, and just not a very scary or interesting or intriguing horror film. You know, it's more like along the lines of Jacob's Ladder. You don't know where to put it. You don't know what to do with it. And that's unfortunately where I would put Phantom. So, as I bring the Periscope down on another episode of Real Talk, I do definitely want to thank HTLA for giving me the opportunity to put my film school education to use for you here each week. I want to thank our sponsors and all of those involved in the making of the films that I analyze here for you. A big thank you to my crew and always to my leading man, Chris Crash Taylor. Don't forget, go to the website, check out what's coming next, post in the forums about tonight's show, and check out the rest of our original programming because we broadcast just about every night during the week. Be sure to check out our weekly video webisodes each weekend as well. And tune in next week as I dish for real about all things real. Good night, Meeps.
From all of us at HTLA Radio 1 New York, happy holidays!